Dr. Liz DuBois Erskine is a PhD conflict analyst and executive coach who helps high performers stop self-sabotaging through people-pleasing, burnout, and fear of judgment. A former Disney and iHeartRadio marketing professional, she now works with leaders in male-dominated and high-pressure environments to build executive presence and redefine success beyond hustle culture. Drawing on trauma-informed conflict analysis, somatic tools, and sharp zero BS coaching, she supports clients to dismantle internalized good girl programming, navigate conflict with clarity, and lead from unapologetic authenticity rather than anxiety and overwork. Wow, you do a hell of a lot. there's a lot to get into
Really
there.
fun though. My husband and I were driving last night to go pick up my car that needed a new part, and we were just like had 4 minutes in the car between our house and the shop. We live in a small town. And I said, I just have the best job in the whole wide world. And he kind of got quiet for a second. He's like, everybody should be so lucky as to get to feel that way. Right. And it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I was still thinking about my job. And as someone that thinks a lot about burnout and all of that, for me, I am never not thinking about what I do because it's so dear to me, like a precious friend where I just get to like be putting good stuff into the world. And so it's less about like I'm doing a bunch and more about I'm just being myself and I get to help other people in the process.
Do you think the 16-year-old you would recognize who you are and what you do today?
Oh, I think she is me. I think I'm very, very, very much the same person. I lost her for a long time. A
Mm,
long, long, long time, but I got divorced about 8 years ago and
mhm.
went on a real quest to not to find myself again, but to allow myself to be who I really am again. And that, oh man, I feel like that kind of like came to a place where I was like, the quest of this has ended and now it's just getting to enjoy it. That probably coalesced like 2 years ago, I wanna say, maybe 3, right? I don't know. My husband and I have been dating for probably like 2 years, and I was finally like, "Whoa, wow, I feel like I'm myself 100% again."
That's pretty special, isn't it?
Mhm. Pretty fun. I get to be myself all day long and get
Yeah.
paid for it.
Well, a lot of people also think, "Well, I'm always myself." Then they actually think about it again and think, "Oh, no, I'm not, am I? I'm just who either society tells me I should be or who my partner expects me to be." And that's quite different, I think.
Mhm, 100%.
So I gave an intro of you, but how would you describe what you do?
The way I actually describe it is I say I'm a lot like a therapist for people in high pressure, high visibility careers. And everyone goes, "Oh, okay." Right? Because I see a lot of description of coaches, especially people that don't define them specifically as, like, an executive coach as I do, or, a health coach or parenting coach or,
Mhm,
but I'm a coach, and it's this kind of amorphous thing. They speak in broad general terms of subconscious limiting beliefs and
mhm,
overcoming people pleasing, which is part of my bio. And just this kind of general sense of there's stuff that's making it hard for you to be real, but it's all couched in this language of professional development that's become very just like flimsy. It doesn't really say anything because at the heart of what at least I work with executives, work specifically with high performers, what they struggle with is a feeling of somebody's going to figure out that I'm not actually supposed to be where I am, right? Like I've
yeah,
ascended to the heights of my industry and somebody's going to it kind of like looks one of two ways. One, somebody's going to call bullshit and figure out that I'm not actually qualified to be at this level. Or two, I've made it to the tippy top and now that I'm here, I can't make a mistake and I have to like I'm kind of constrained. I feel chained in by the expectations of this position that I now hold, whether that's an actual job title or I'm at the top of my industry and people look at me as he's got it all together. And in reality, now I can't make a misstep because there's so much visibility, there's so many eyes on me.
mm. It is amazing how many people have that, defined as sort of imposter syndrome or
Mhm.
how did I get here? Why am I doing this? And gosh, that doesn't feel quite right. But no, I I recognize that from the sort of corporate world I've been in, and I wonder why we find that high performers, people in positions of real responsibility, why they find themselves in situations where they are self-sabotaging. And you said before, through people pleasing, burnout,
Mhm.
fear of judgment. What does self-sabotage look? How does it manifest in the workplace?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I'm gonna come at it pretty narrowly from
Mhm.
executive leadership, because I think that there's a lot of answers to that question, but just depends on kind of who you're thinking about. So we're both PhDs. We can be extra nerdy, right? Okay, so here we go. So evolutionary anthropologists have theorized that we came to exist as a species in clumps of about 200 people. That was kind of
Mhm.
the squishy, like right size Goldilocks size of a group of humans living together cooperatively was about 200 people. And so after you expand past that point, there's a feeling of being out over your depth, right? There's so much pressure that we just don't have the biology, we don't have the neural infrastructure to be able to go, oh, this is how I be in community with a lot of people. So I think part of it comes down to we just aren't built to have this much visibility, to have this much connection, to have this much expectation coming at us. So I think one of the ways that people sabotage is they try to make themselves smaller, right?
Mhm.
And so we hear a lot, especially with women, of like, oh, don't be small. You're making yourself small. I used to have a podcast called Small No More. We talked a lot about people kind of shying away from being as big and as bold as they are. And I am convinced a big part of that is just evolution, that we are fundamentally uncomfortable with the idea of getting too big, right? And we have expressions like, she's too big for her britches. Who does he think
Yeah.
he is? Right? We have
Yeah,
language that
we do.
expresses this sentiment. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that there's something very like reptilian about us that says there's only there's safety exists within a confined space. And if you exceed that space, right now you're on the cover of Time Magazine or Inc. Magazine, and you're being interviewed by, Joe Rogan or whoever you want to think of as like a hugely visible podcast or whatever, you've exceeded that limit that says, this is my tribe. This is where I'm known and appreciated and accepted. And now I'm out into a space where I don't know that those things can remain true. So I'm going to sabotage and create smallness in my life because there's a certain sense of safety in it.
And one of the things that I always struggle with at work was the notion that as you got promoted, you got more and more people to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And almost the number of people you managed was almost we had in companies I worked for, you had to manage people that were managing other people to get to a certain level, a certain
Yeah.
grade. It was dependent on it. And I know some amazing people that are brilliant salespeople, engineers, strategists, whatever. Would I want them as my manager? Not in a month of Sundays. And they themselves would be like, I hate the management side of things. I was lucky. I loved it. I had a huge team, always wanted more and more people, just loved being with people. And my biggest win was always when somebody in my team got promoted or could nurture the talent. And I loved working with people. So that was my skill, I guess. But a lot of people, it's just not. And
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why do you think businesses still go down this route of the more senior you get, the more people you get to manage. That's just default, and we don't necessarily look at almost we don't look at management of people as a skill
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we think about leadership poorly. We
Mm.
don't understand what leadership is. So Bill Gates nope, not true. Not true. Steve Jobs, delete that. Sorry, Bill Gates. Steve Jobs once said his job was to conduct the orchestra, right? He had to have enough humility and self-awareness to know that it was not his job to jump in the pit and try to be the first violinist and play the piccolo and tell the, timpani exactly, how high to strike the thing. He had to hire the right people and put them in the right sections and then have trust in them to be able to perform their jobs and have trust in himself that he had done a good enough job of hiring those people, that he could then just focus on conducting the orchestra, right?
Yeah.
This is how I get these different elements to play together so that the whole thing works well. What we often do is we start to promote people from in the pit and we say, well, you're the first violinist, but now you're going to be the conductor, but you're still going to be managing the people in the violin section, but also now you also have to manage the rest of the orchestra too. And we're not going to train you how to do that. And so there's a broken construct of how we empower quote unquote leaders to become leaders. We ask them to be managers and also continue to play roles where they're staying in and being micromanagers at this place or at this point, because they haven't been fully trained to step into leadership, which is a mindset and a skill set, not just a promotion.
I want 100%. My I think one of my big skills, not blowing my own trumpet, was
do it.
Just hiring really intelligent people. If ever I find myself the smartest person in the room, which I don't think I ever did, I would just change rooms. Why on earth would I would? They're amazing people. They're talented violinists, oboists, cellists, whatever. I'm never going to have those skills. But I'm going to hire the very best people to possibly do that. And I think a lot of people, some people are sort of nervous of hiring people that one day they might want my job. Well, that's great. I can have another job. I want people to want my job. I want people to take my job. I want them to make me, unemployable in this role to do something else. But I do think a lot of people do see sort of control of people as part of their power base.
Yeah.
I just feel quite sad.
I think it's also like I see this play out in different ways based on gender. For women, I see this play out in a sense of it's kind of a form of insecurity of if I give top-down direction and then don't also try to jump in and be part of being quote-unquote helpful, then you must think that I'm better than you, right? And this is breaking. I'm speaking in very elementary terms, right? But the general premise is I don't want you to think I'm not being collaborative, and therefore I'm going to do the stuff with you. And this comes across as, one, micromanaging. Two, it's terrible time management because now you've got two people doing the same thing or some iteration of the same thing. And this can look like really mundane too. It can be simply like, make sure you CC me on this email. Well, why? Why do you need to be CC'd on this email? Is it because you don't trust that your underling is going to be able to do the thingy? You're just like, you just disempowered this person and made them feel like they don't have full autonomy to be able to do a thing. Like, stop asking to be CC'd on emails. Why are you hiring people that you think that you have to have oversight of in that micromanaging away, right? This can look a lot of different mundane ways, but at the end of the day, it comes down to, I don't trust myself to have hired the right person. And I don't trust myself to have trained them well enough to do the things. And I don't trust myself well enough to think that I have communicated it properly. And all of it ends up in messy, inefficient leadership that leaves everyone feeling frustrated.
I worked in a couple of very male-dominated initiatives. So I worked in corporate real estate for a couple of massive global companies. And if you look at the stats, then the numbers would show 50% men and 50% women. But we all know that the data hides a multitude of sins. And I think one of the things that always upset me as a father of a daughter and as a husband of a wife is that we'll be in a meeting and we'll be sort of talking, and there were people of the same level, male and female, and very often something will come up, an opportunity, whatever, and it might be something pretty much out of their comfort zone, whatever. The guy would typically say, "Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that," and the woman would typically be, "Well, I haven't done that before. I haven't actually got that skill set." And I think we find there's something on LinkedIn saying that if it asks for 10 skills, a guy will apply for it if he's got 2 of them.
It's
Whereas
3 and
women
it's
will want to
8.
have 9 of them. Do you still find that?
Yeah, the number you're looking at 3 and 8. So,
3 and
so
8,
if
there you go.
if a man and a woman, broadly speaking, right, this is individual results may vary. But if there's a job posting and there's 10 qualifications, a man has to say, oh, there's 3 in that, I'm sure I can figure it out. For a female, she has to see 8 out of 10 things. And I have specific clients I can think of immediately that this is still, they're years into a job in an executive role and still feel uncomfortable about the fact that they got hired being only quote unquote like half qualified to do the job. And it's heartbreaking for me because I look at these talented, powerful, just incredible, effective leaders, and there's still so much self-doubt because I don't know. Like I was hired and I'm only 50% of the way there. Like God bless America if like all of us were, blessed with children when we were 80% ready to be parents.
Yeah,
There would be
absolutely.
there'd be like 3 parents on the face of the earth. Everybody else would be floundering and childless. I think that it's really, really common to doubt yourself. There's a form of safety and protection in that says, let me make sure I don't take on more than I can chew. And I think that there's like a healthy dose of that, right? But the poison's in the dose. There's something healthy and there's healthy humility in saying, let me make sure I'm really up for taking on the management of other people, right?
Mm.
When it veers into something that's unhelpful and it becomes insecurity, it becomes second guessing, it turns into micromanagement, etc., is when that self-preservation instinct or that preservation instinct, if I want to make sure that I do this well, gets kicked into, and I'm going to think about that to the point that it becomes the consuming thought versus something that's in the back of my mind from time to time.
Yeah. And maybe there's something in our historical makeup and how the generations have passed that, going back a few generations, not trying to stereotype, but I'm now going to stereotype. Typically, the man went out to work, the woman stayed at home, the woman ran the house, the woman decided on the children, all that sort of stuff. So actually, the real world decisions that women were making were much, much more valuable and had potentially had much, much more impact.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, actually, what to feed the family, how to house the family, how to clothe the children, all of what schools to go to, typically all decided by women. Whereas men's decisions, it didn't really matter as much. How often do we go to the pub? What do I do? Where do we go for dinner? That sort of stuff didn't really matter. Whereas the women's decisions actually had real world consequences. And maybe there's something in our genetic makeup that has that sort of historical, gosh, those big decisions were really important. I'm really going to make sure I make the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas guys, we've never really had that. we just sort of bumble along and blag it most of the time. Which
I don't think of it as bumbling along. Like the older I get, no. So I have 3 different college degrees, all of which touched on gender and sexuality studies in some way, some more than others, and I founded the Center for the Study of Gender and Conflict at George Mason, which is no longer. But I founded it, and while I was at the university, I was their executive director. That is a long preamble to say I think a lot about gender issues and sexuality. And the older I get, the more I'm convinced there's so much evolution behind this. And maybe having children like led to me also thinking this. Right? You breastfeed a baby and you start to think a lot about your biology. A lot of time on your hands. I really genuinely think that there's some biology under this. Women can multitask and they can think about these kind of like scaffolding decisions, meaning like men come in and they make these grand sweeping pronouncements, right? This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is how it's play out. But those big sweeping things can't go anywhere, can't get enacted in a company without scaffolding underneath it, the structures that make it possible, right? So whether it's a household or a company or a country, if you don't have the infrastructure that says, this is what's for dinner, this is how the laundry got folded, right? These are all the basic mundane things that are going to happen that make it possible, the scaffolding underlying the major decisions. Those major decisions can't hold. And I do think that there's an evolutionary component to that, right? If you are busy breastfeeding a child and tending to the fire and making sure your toddler is not being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger and all of that. Like, there's a lot of neuroinfrastructural underneath that is different than I'm going to go hunt a thing, right? We see men being very directed towards one specific objective. That is the thing that I am working on. And you can see women kind of varying their level of focus to make sure that lots and lots and lots of littler, quote unquote, things are happening. But it's those little things that makes the bigger initiatives possible.
And one of the things that we saw during COVID and the pandemic, where people had to work from home, and in the UK at least, children were sort of sent home from school and had to work from school, whatever. But I think there was a lot of research done, which is good to get lots of data. But maybe I wasn't surprised, but I think I was still a bit depressed. But I think the stats in the UK showed that 80% of household chores and children's education, all that sort of stuff, was still being done by, even though both man and woman in the household might have equally senior jobs, the woman may well have a more senior job. Still, when we were forced to be at home all the time, it almost seemed to fall back into those very stereotypical historical gender roles where, well, yes, you're busy working, but you also need to feed us all, look after the kids, do everything else. Were you surprised at that?
I want to caveat this by saying I do not have this dynamic in my marriage. My husband is the tender of all of the things. I do one specific thing. I do my job, and beyond that, I don't grocery shop. I don't cook. I don't do any of the things. So I'm outing myself as an outlier in this, as a preface to say, is me coming at this as a professional and not in any way, shape, or form as a person that's experiencing it currently. So it doesn't surprise me. I think that we as a species all species tend to default into what's most known, right? What's most common. And so if those structures were already in play in the midst of a crisis, I think it's the most natural thing in the world that we would just revert into that, and that would be kind of the most comfortable space for us to exist. Whether or not, when I say comfortable, I do not mean this feels great, I love it. I mean comfortable in the sense of the nasty ass sweatpants that you pull on because it's the only thing left to wear and you've always worn it and they fit really well. So they're very, very comfortable in the sense of this is what I know, not this is super duper great and I'm so glad this is happening. Does that make sense?
100%. 100%. Do you find when you're coaching and working with executives, is there a generalism, I guess, is there a generalism that executives try and keep their non-work life very much away from their work life? Because what I'm thinking is, and I've often thought, if something's happening in my personal life, home life, whatever, it's very, very hard not to bring that into. It's very hard to sort of switch off and leave the front door, go to work, and then come home and start those debates and discussions all over again. How do you help people almost manage because I think one of the big misnomers we've had for quite a few years now is the whole notion of, and you might disagree, but work-life balance, which always suggests like 50-50, which I think that's just such a falsehood. I think there's very much more of a holistic, much more fluid. Sometimes work, sometimes home, sometimes personal, sometimes professional. It's much more of a fluid dynamic. And I just wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I don't strive for a work-life balance, and I don't encourage my clients to either. I think that it becomes its own source of pressure, right? My work-life balance is off. So what I look for more is a flow, right? Like I don't think of like my faucet being balanced on any given day. I'm like, oh, I washed my hands and now it's unbalanced because I didn't wash, what it's like if the water's there, it flows, right? If I need personal time in my personal life, it flows. And even yesterday being a great example. So my car made a weird noise. And the shop that we use also happens to be a client because I'm great at networking. And so I had an appointment with them for me to go there and coach them at 1:00. And I called them and I said, can I come in early and give you the car? And they said, yep. Right. And they did my car while I was working with them. And the whole thing just kind of worked. There was no part where I was like, now I have to take time off work to deal with this thing. It was just, I've got 15 minutes here and that's part of my work day, quote unquote. but it's like I am 100. It's Dr. Liz is a person who is always being a person, right? And so there's not a moment where I'm like, now I'm a professional person and now I'm a at-home person. It's just I'm a person, and what are the things that I need to do right now? Um, I will say I only work about 25, 30 hours a week. And so for me, I really prioritize my mental health
Mhm.
and my time with my child. He's almost 12, and I'm kind of like, I only have so many more years where I can force him to hang out with me. So,
Yep.
so those are my big priorities. And so work kind of fits in between those things, rather than vice versa. And it just flows. Like, I'm going to end this conversation with you and get in the car and go get him from school. And then we'll do some stuff. And I'm sure tonight I'll fold some laundry and then also be working on some stuff. And tomorrow I'll get up and I'll work on some stuff. And then we're going to drive to the beach. And I don't really try to think about it as like, now I'm professional and now I'm personal.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm being myself, and what do I need to do right this second? And I
Mm.
think that when people sit down and they try to create something that's rigid, it becomes another source of anxiety as opposed to something that's helpful.
Mm. I wanted to talk a little bit about conflict.
Yeah.
And hopefully I've got the words right, but I think you talk quite a lot about conflict analysis as opposed to conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And well, two parts, I guess. One, could you expand upon that? And then secondly, do you find that businesses, individuals, perhaps repress conflict more today than they have in the past? And the reason I ask that is I think a lot of people are nervous about conflict in the workplace, are nervous about what it might mean from a personnel perspective, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
almost sit on conflicts, and then we all know that if they sit on something, eventually it's going to explode. But yeah, so first of all, I wonder if you can sort of talk about conflict analysis as opposed necessarily to conflict resolution, and then
Yeah.
touch on the second
Okay. Yeah, we'll take part 2 on its own in a minute. Because it's a harder question for me to answer. We'll do the easier one. So I talk about conflict analysis versus conflict resolution specifically because I don't think conflicts really get resolved. I think they evolve,
part.
which is a little too buzzwordy for me, but we'll go with it. Conflicts don't resolve, they evolve. Um,
Right.
I think that it's very rare where we say this conflict's over, we say this conflict shaped where we're at, right? Like the relationship between both of our countries, right? We had a very, very bad start in terms of the relationship with the United States of America and the United Kingdom. It didn't go well, right? We were all very upset at each other, lots of fighting. We founded
Yep.
a few military, branches in the process. It wasn't great. And yet we evolved from that place, but it still shapes and defines part of the culture of both of us, right? Like, my son is wearing a t-shirt to a picnic in a couple of weeks, and it says America spilling the tea since 1775, right? And it's like, it's still part of the culture that we have,
Mhm.
a shared history of conflict. And then we move into it, fast forward into World War II. We have a shared history of conflict that defines how our relationship as countries, play out, and even our relationships between people in those countries play out. And I think to say that, well, we've resolved that conflict, ties it up in a neat little bow that actually doesn't exist. And it makes it impossible to look backwards and say, well, how did we get to the point that we're at now? And what can we learn from that to address the current situation? And if that situation has aspects of negative conflict, because I think there's positive conflict, how do we learn from our shared history here? How do we go backwards and look at the evolution of this conflict so that we can learn from it, as opposed to say, well, now it's over?
Mm. It almost makes me think when you were saying that a business that experiences no conflict,
Mm-hmm.
assume such a thing exists, is likely to be less successful than a business that experiences conflict. And that might sound very odd, but then the reason it just came to mind as you were saying it is that because conflict in many ways evokes passion, desire, drive, difference of opinion, success. It feels like there's conflict for a reason in some way. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily, at least it's not always negative conflict. So I think it feels like conflict could, and I'm sure with some of the massive sort of tech companies we've seen now, you hear about lots of internal conflict, and it still seems to drive growth as opposed to sort of suck them into it. Am I talking complete nonsense, or does that make sense?
I don't think you're talking nonsense. I think that conflict's essential, right?
Mm.
Like tonight, my son and I, we will have pizza for dinner or we will have sushi. That in and of itself is a conflict. Like we're not gonna have both. Sorry, right? Like pick one or the other. There's losses on both sides.
Mm.
Um, I, I think to view conflict as something that's always negative is really futile because there's always going to be things like if you choose A, by definition, B is not happening. And as the leader of a company, if you're constantly viewing trade-offs as something that's inherently a negative thing, you're ignoring the fact that there's growth in the decision making, right? That there's growth in the process of wrestling with, well, why A and not B, or vice versa. There's I don't know. The thing that keeps coming to mind is like the shuttle, right? When the space shuttle takes off, right? Like there's violence in that, and there's disjointedness, and there's explosions, and then there's pieces coming off and falling to the ground, and all of that. Like all of those things are like violent and conflictual, if you will, right? But it's also a process that propels things forward. And so
Yeah.
um I don't think running a company with the ambition of having everything go smoothly is a good idea.
Mm. We touched before we sort of hit record a little bit on how businesses are engaging or not with AI.
Mhm.
I know you can't necessarily generalize or talk in specifics, but what are you finding amongst executives you work with that is seeing the most success in terms of how companies are engaging with artificial intelligence?
So I will say this is not a huge aspect of my work,
Mhm.
period. I deal with the psych my husband calls it the psychobabble. I deal with the psychobabbles. I deal with the emotions and the
People. Yeah.
psychology and the conflict. I deal with the conflicts that come up internally
Mm.
when someone strives for greater levels of authority and leadership, right? And
Mhm.
because there's parts of us that just aren't yet on board with the idea of being bigger than we've always been up to that point. So that's the work that I do. What I'll say is see people using ChatGPT, and I'll raise my hand and say I use Claude all day
Mhm.
long. Um,
Same.
that's what I see people doing the most. But this is I don't know. It's not the area that I work in.
How would you, let me give you a live example then. So there are companies that look at AI in two ways. One is efficient AI,
Mhm,
which is about how do we do the same with less, as
mhm,
in let's cut our headcount by 20%, versus companies that see opportunity AI, which is AI that does more with just a little bit more. And so when you're dealing with a conflict, perhaps within a business where you've got one side of the discussion is around, well, we can just cut costs and we can save money and we can get rid of people and we can bring in this tool, etc. Versus the other side that is, well, we can bring in this tool to support people and work with them, and actually we can do more with that. How
mhm.
do you, yeah, how do you help people recognize the value in maybe the latter?
Um, I just want to be really intellectually honest and say it's not a conflict I've run up against yet. The people that I work with in general are
Mhm.
not making trade-offs about hiring and firing based off productivity and related to AI. What they are looking at is how do I lead people in a way to get the best out of them? And that's
Yeah.
when we come into conversations around micromanagement and
Mm.
trusting yourself to have hired the right person and leadership development and helping cultivate a sense of there's a form of insecurity of if I empower my people too much and they do so well, then I'm going to work myself out of a job. And so I've got to make sure to continue to like stay in the fray a little bit so that I look relevant. I don't want to get like, I don't want to seem irrelevant to the point that I get knocked out of a job here, which is a form of insecurity that leads to micromanagement, right? Because it
Yeah,
puts you
yeah.
back in the fray. So that's really the lane that I stay in, is
Mm,
helping people manage well and get the best out of their people, which is, I think, quite different than do I reduce my workforce because
mm,
I've been able to replace some of them with computers.
mm. Do you find that the executives that you work with have a fear of judgment, that they are concerned about what people think and how to respond to the decisions that they make?
100%. 100%. It looks different for men than it does for women.
Okay.
Um, but the common element is kind of like, I feel like I need to play within the constructs of what people expect from me. And anything outside those bounds is just not safe, and I'm not going to let myself do it. I think that that's like the most overarching experience, regardless of gender, is there's things people expect me to be, and there's ways that people expect me to behave. And if I do something counter to those things, then it's not okay. And people think a lot about that.
It's very interesting you say that. So just an example from my working life. So I had a big team that was sort of scattered all around the world, and every week I would sort of send out just I guess a personal note that would reflect on my sort of thoughts for the week. Or some people might see it and think, "Oh my goodness, just straight for delete." Some people would read it and comment and say it was really interesting. And I there were two general views of it. People that reported into me notionally would always say that they really respected and valued my vulnerability, was the word
Mhm.
that they used. My bosses and fellow executives would always challenge me on, why are you being so vulnerable to the team? Why are you
Mm,
sharing so much of yourself with the team? And yes, I think I was an anomaly in the sort of the executive space, I guess, that
yeah.
I always wanted to share with my team as much as I could without nothing they shouldn't know, but just always very, very open and vulnerable, because I always thought I got the best results back. And I wonder, is that how it's a bit late now, I guess, but how vulnerable do you think, if that's the right word, executives should be, and how open should they be to their teams?
Yeah, I'm just writing a note so I don't forget. I think that there's a really big difference between being vulnerable and oversharing. I think,
Yep,
does that make sense?
it does, yeah.
Yeah, I see this in the nonprofit space with my nonprofit executives, and not specific clients necessarily at the moment. Right? What I see in the nonprofit space is oversharing, and to some extent trauma dumping, where people are just sharing and sharing
Yeah,
and sharing and sharing and sharing in the service of wanting to be relatable.
yeah.
But because there's not great boundaries there to begin with, and which I think is endemic to nonprofits in general, where there's
Mhm.
such a focus on the mission, and we just have to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
this right, no matter the cost that it takes it to the actual staff, right?
Mhm.
Because it's so important that we do all these things that are part of our mission. It doesn't matter that there's no quality of life, and that we're all anxious all the time, and everyone's overworked, and we're all a little bit codependent with one another. That's the space where I see executives get overly involved in other people's personal lives in the service of supporting their staff. And
Yeah.
I see oversharing coming from a sense of, well, I want to be relatable. I think there's a difference between being genuine and open about who you are as a person, and crossing over a line of being, I don't want to say friends, because I do think that you can form friendships with people that work for
Mm.
you. I genuinely believe that. Um, but there's a difference between commodified vulnerability, like let me share with you who I am so that you trust me more,
Mm.
versus being a real human and saying, this is where I'm at, and this was, my daughter's really sick, and I'm a little distracted right now. Can somebody double check my emails to make sure that the spelling's correct? Because I'm just a little scattered.
Yeah.
That's vulnerability. That's different than weaponizing your personal story in a way that makes other people feel like, oh gosh, he's one of us, so that you in turn can then get them to do more stuff for you.
Gosh, hopefully I was the former of those.
Yeah, I paint a dark picture.
No, you don't. But I do think it's interesting, and I think because if you're an executive, theoretically there's going to be somebody that reports into somebody, into somebody, into somebody, into somebody. It could be sort of 7 or 8 or 10 layers below you in a management hierarchy,
Yeah.
whatever. And a lot of people sort of see the executive, and so you see it as this amorphous mass that is never concerned, is never worried, is just completely sort of self-aware. So, and yeah, almost sort of seeing, well, actually, yeah, we are human too. It's, yeah, sometimes I think it helps just explain to the business why the decisions are being made and not just proclaim a decision, especially when, businesses that go through right sizing. It's funny, whenever they say right sizing, this means make smaller. Right sizing
I
or
mean, fire
rationalizing, all
people.
those things.
Right
It's, yeah,
sizing just means we're getting rid of people. You're losing your
absolutely.
job.
It just sounds like a slightly nicer way of putting it. But I think, yeah, helping people understand, even though it doesn't necessarily help them if they're the one person you're getting rid of, but help them understand what that might look like, really. Well, when you help clients maybe get back to, I think in your words, who they were before the programming, what changes in that progression?
I think that there's a big sense of permission internally to be someone that other people aren't expecting them to be.
Mhm.
Um, and you can lose friends in the process of that. You can lose people that have been in your life for years and years and years. They say, well, I just don't even know who you are anymore. And it's meant as an insult, right? There's a lot of people that perform really well. And I don't mean perform as in like they have good job performance. I mean, they act the part of being
Yes.
someone very different than who they really are, right at their core,
Mm.
because they think that it's going to they correctly think that it's going to get them on the corporate ladder, that they're going to be seen as credible and legitimate, and they're right. There's ways that we view people and we go, well, that person's legitimate, that person's credible, that person is X, Y, and Z, and to pretend that that's not true is, I think, counterproductive. But a lot of people who have made it into the upper echelons of their industry, or the nonprofits, if you want to call that something different than an industry, they have been a version of themselves for a long time who's not really the version of themselves that can be happy, like fully happy. So I think the first big thing is that there's an internal permission of I'm allowed to just be myself, and then there's some grief internally of what's going to change in my life if I stop being this other like false person that I've been. And then
Mm.
it's just a matter, I say just as if it's simple, then it's a matter of self-support and supporting, cultivating support from other people, whether it's through a coach or network. I always advocate getting a whiteboard and writing down the names of people who will unconditionally support the shit out of you. That's how I started my journey back to being my real self, my 16-year-old self, if you will. I think that the progression is messy. It's nonlinear. It's as fast as the person is willing to let themselves go. There's not a lot of external impediments to becoming yourself again, becoming your real
Mm.
self. But the internal impediments can be very, very daunting, and they, because there's real world consequences. Your marriage might fall apart. You might lose your job. Right? You might find out that might find out that you're not straight. That was part of, I knew I was bisexual for years, but I never did anything about it because it didn't fit the construct of the life that I wanted to lead, right? And so I think that to pretend that there's not real world changes to just deciding, well, now I'm going to be more authentic. It's not a Hallmark card. It's messy and it's gritty and it's not always cute.
So you reference your your journey then, and we talked before about re-becoming your sort of 16-year-old self. Did in the period between the actual 16-year-old self and the person you are today, can you look back and recognize the moments where perhaps, and if these are the wrong words, they're not meant to be offensive anyway, but
No.
could you recognize the moments where perhaps you valued yourself less than you should have done?
100%.
Okay.
100%. A lot of them involve past relationships, so I don't necessarily want to trot out any specifics.
No. Was it that you were seeking external validation above self-validation?
No, I think I just wanted to be loved.
Okay.
I think I just wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted somebody to love me and to be part of a relationship. My smallness, my self-imposed smallness often came from some of it was external validation, but a lot of it was just I want to be enough and I want to have somebody love me.
And how different does it feel now that you have that?
Oh, it's terrifying. Cause I know that I can have every single thing, except my health, leave and I'll still be just fine. I won't
Mm.
be thrilled about it, right? There would be a lot of pain and grief and loss.
Mhm.
But who I am is no longer predicated on what anybody else says or does or accepts or doesn't accept of me. So it's exhilarating, but it's also kind of like flying blind, right? Because there's no I don't have any set expectations for myself. If I want to decide at 4 o'clock today that I'm going to go to law school and, become a lawyer instead, like I'm fully available to back myself for that decision. I don't think that I'm going to do it. Right. But if I decide to close my company and go work at a pizza restaurant because I want to take a couple years off and don't want to have any of the aspects of running a company, like I'm here for it. I fully support myself. I'll back myself, whether or not other people think it's a good idea.
I love that. That's a fabulous answer.
Oh,
Just back to the executives just for a second. So, if an executive comes to you and perhaps they're sort of self-aware enough to recognize that their leadership style or something they've done has probably unintentionally had results they hadn't anticipated. Maybe it's
okay.
harmed people in terms of it made people work too hard, boundaries are gone, the communication's been inappropriate. How do you help them? It's a big word, I guess, but genuinely repair that relationship or that dynamic.
I literally had this happen in a session yesterday. Thinking about like conflict not being resolved but evolved, like in this particular circumstance, it wasn't the right thing to go call up this woman from years ago and try to patch it up that this thing had happened. That this executive had made a call that was, pretty heartless. Wasn't the right thing to kind of like go make amends. It was going forward, how do I learn from this in such a way that, not just that I want to learn from my mistakes and not repeat the same mistake again. Not just that, but how do I have compassion for myself and forgive myself for doing something that was incongruent with my own value system? I think that's really hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the things that I worry about having done in my past, I cannot imagine that anybody else is thinking about me. Right? Like not 9 years ago, I made some pretty big missteps in my career as I was starting to go through my divorce. I was very distracted. And then just in general was over my head. It was a bad situation. It wasn't a good fit. And other people got hurt. And I have so much pain and just anguish and embarrassment but mostly just remorse that I didn't handle that better and that other people got hurt in the process. I've got a lot of remorse. I used to have a lot of embarrassment about it, but less that now. More, just sadness. And I wish I had done it differently. And I wish I had, I wish it had happened differently. And I wish I had played my role differently. But I think that the self-forgiveness is the bigger part than the going and trying to fix it, right? Like I can't go back in time and do that differently. But I can play my part now in a way that I think is in alignment with the right thing to do. And kind of, I think that that's the best we can do. But I think the big work is self-forgiveness more than resolution with somebody else.
And how do you nurture your own mental and physical well-being? You come in some difficult situations and challenging situations. It's good that you work 30 hours a week, but I'm sure they're bloody intense 30 hours a week. So how do you almost protect and nurture yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things. One, I don't work with people I don't like. I say no to a lot of people. I'm really, really, really careful about energy vampires, like bringing clients in who are WLBs, whiny little bitches. I don't work with whiny little bitches. So I cultivate my clientele very carefully. I think that's a big part. I'm part of a recovery community for people with drugs and alcohol abuse issues. My third date with my husband, I invited him to go to a recovery meeting. We're both sober, and that was our third date. It set the tone for kind of, this is who I am, and this is baseline expectation for my life. It's never going to change. So this is part of the deal. So if you want to go on a fourth date with me, know that this is part of the deal. So I've got a lot of non-negotiables in my life. My son has my full attention from Monday at 3 p.m. until bedtime. And again, Tuesday from 3 p.m. until bedtime, no matter what. Those aren't times where I take client phone calls. Like he gets those 2 afternoons a week to do just mom stuff, because one day he's not going to be 12 and he's not going to want to hang out with mom all day long after school. So it's not going to let me take him to Tuesday $7 movie nights. Let's see what else. I go for a walk almost every morning. The first thing I do when I get up is I pray, and then I go for a walk, and it's like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe. But it's enough to like wake my body up. And in general, I'm really good about drinking water, but the past week I have not, and I feel like poop about it. So it's some good accountability that you asked this question.
No, he's plaudits on being sober. So I've been sober for 15 years and 2 months now.
Wow.
And sometimes it's hard, but you know that but you just remember the alternative.
I'll have 20 years dry September 6th.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's crazy. But we went out, my husband and I went out last night to a local charity was doing a bingo, and I had donated like a marketing strategy session as one of the gifts. So we went and played bingo for a little bit, and there was a couple at our table, and they were having beer because the bingo thing was at a brewery, right? Like you drink beer when you're at a brewery. And it doesn't usually bother me, but right as I'm coming up on an anniversary, and I'm like, it's not September yet, right? Like it's still a while away, but I think because it's such a big one, I start to have dreams about drinking where like I accidentally drink something and then realize like I don't almost have 20 years. And it's not about the number, right? But it is kind of it feels like a bit like I'm almost 43. I haven't had a drink since I was 22. That feels big. And, I don't want to let that slip. But so I'm watching this other couple drink their beer, and I'm like, damn it, all the fuck. I hope I don't have a drinking dream. Helps when someone else.
I sometimes have this, maybe it's a dream or a thought, but I should just have one just to prove that I don't need it, which is literally the worst thing everybody listening is going, no, don't, and I haven't. But there's always alcohol in the house. My wife still drinks. My family still drinks.
Yeah.
I go to places where there's drink consumed, whatever. And certainly in my corporate career, it was a drinking culture really. And it wasn't as hard. Actually, it wasn't as hard then when it was drinking culture, because I was just I knew that I had to be very strong
Yeah.
about that. But now when it's like it's a sunny day and I think, I could just have a beer in the garden, couldn't I? And then I could just not have any more after that. Just have the one, and that would be it. We all know, we all know where that goes.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, let me tell you exactly how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've relapsed before, and it's nope, no, thank you.
So you've been very generous with your time. Thank you, and your wisdom. And so my final question, and I don't know, it might be a very short answer, but do you have are you a vision for the future kind of person? Do you have a feeling for what the next? I guess if you look back, you wouldn't necessarily have guessed 10 years ago what life would look like today. But do you have a feeling for what the next 5 to 10 years might bring?
It's so funny you say that. Like, so last night, I have a coach that I've worked with for years, and I sometimes fall into a little bit of a place of comparison. She makes oodles and caboodles more money than I do, right? She's got this beautiful house and blah, just like all the things. I have all the things too. They just look different, right? And they didn't cost millions and millions of dollars. And that's okay, right? And so my husband and I, we have like this redneck hot tub. I don't know, is redneck a term in the UK?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this redneck hot tub. It's this inflatable hot tub, and it's our backyard. And my husband built this like fence around it so that we can be in it sans clothing, should we wish to be, when our children are not home. And so we were hanging out in the hot tub last night, and we're walking in the house, and we're walking through like all the debris and clutter of our like garage that isn't, just like a mess, and my office isn't in the garage. It's just like a beautiful disaster of a home. And I thought to myself, but this is exactly what I want. I don't want a big fancy this and that and the other thing. Like, I love that, it makes me so happy that my afternoon was spent in part helping my husband build a fence around our hot tub so we could hang out in our backyard naked, like drinking Sprite Zeros instead of, fancy cocktails or whatever. And like, I've always wanted a life that had like some grit to it and some like you have to work for it to it. And I just love that I have that. And so I don't know like what it'll look like forever. My house is paid off and my car is paid off. So I intend to live here and drive that car for quite some time. But like beyond that, I have, I'm open-minded.
It's the best way to be. Thank you so much. I wasn't sure what to expect, and that was, I enjoyed it.
I'm glad, me too.
I enjoyed it. It's really good. Yeah, no, thank you. I like the fact that you work with people that you like, and I'm claiming that. So you agreed to be on a podcast because I'm okay. So.
Yeah, I don't do stuff. Yeah, there's a quote that I don't know who said it, but there's a quote that I've heard more than once that said, how we spend our lives is actually, or how we spend our days is of course how we spend our lives, meaning like what you do on a day-to-day basis is add up to your life. And I've had 3 different people that I care about all my age die in the past 2 years, just out of blue, natural causes. They weren't in a car wreck. There was nothing freak accident. One got cancer, another got cancer, and the third had a stroke. And I just have this real sense of mortality, of just like, who knows? Who knows if I'm here 6 months from now? Like,
yeah.
Who knows if I'm here 4 days from now? My friend Sarah posted on Facebook something about using her heated seats in her car on a road trip and how it worked as like a great heating pad for her like backache. And 3 days later, she had a stroke and was dead. Right. And like, who's to say that I don't post on Facebook, this afternoon and then find out that I have, thyroid cancer? Like, I don't know. And so why on earth would I spend any of my time doing something I don't want to do?
Well, thank you very much for spending time with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoy.
Thanks.